there was a girl I met who I used to take out sometimes, and she came from a farm in what would have been East Germany, you know, and she said when she was 16, something like that, she was with her family in the farm, and her sister, she got a younger sister, and the Russians were advancing, you know, and her parents said, well, you know, tomorrow we've got to get you away from here, and we've got to go to your aunt's in Berlin, you know. They had an aunt who lived in Berlin. And she said, but the Russians suddenly arrived, you know, at dawn, you know, tanks, terrible din. And their parents panicked, and they pushed the two girls out of the window, and they had to slide down a, you know, sloping roof and into the snow, and it was really winter, and there was snow blowing and so forth, and told them to go to Berlin and find their aunt's house and go there. This was all done in a screaming hurry. And this girl said the first thing that happened to her was she lost her sister straight away in the field. It was so snowy, you know, and she just couldn't find her. And in the end she just had to give up. And she was in a night dress and got a scarf or something like that, you know. And she's walking along and pretty well freezing, and there were people trudging along the road, all kind of retreating in front of the war coming towards Berlin, you know. And she said there was a German officer who was wounded, and he was limping along, and he gave her his greatcoat because she got nothing else. But then he died. And she got to get some people together and they buried him, you know. This is a 16-year-old girl, you know. And she carried on. She got in boots then when she died, she said. And she walked on towards Berlin, and the corpses all along the side of the road and so forth. When she got to Berlin, of course, utter devastation. Not only she couldn't find the street where her aunt lived, it was just all flattened, you know, let alone find the aunt's house. And there were some women she saw who said she could come in with them in a cellar, and she went with these women into the cellar where they were hiding, you know, because by now the Russians had reached the city. And she was rather horrified that they were hiding behind the corpses of German soldiers who were piled up at the bottom of the cellar steps where they'd been machine gunned, you know. And but these women reasoned that people look down there and they'd see the corpses, they'd go away. So, and it was cold, so they didn't stink that much, I suppose, and that sort of thing. So she said they lived for a while an existence of going out at night and finding whatever they could to eat, and sharing it between them, and in the day hiding, you know. One of the things they ate was a dog, which had somehow either got killed or whether they killed it, I'm not quite sure, but it was sort of stiff in the snow, they had to thaw it out, you know. And, because I said to her, do you eat it raw? And she said, of course not. She said, we cooked it with salt. What do you think we are? And then she said, when they were hiding one day, all of a sudden, and the Russians were riding up and down our side, what they would do is they'd all get absolutely pissed as farts, and they'd be riding up and down, the Cossacks and shooting all the street lamps out, you know, and things like that, or the balls off statues. If they saw any statues with a pair of testicles, that was lovely. They could and so on, you know. And she said all of a sudden the door opened to the cellar, and there was a Russian officer. And they thought, that's it, after all this, you know, we've now been found. But he was okay. He said, no, don't worry, you know. And he said, I'm going to put a guard on the door. And he said, I'll go and get you something to eat. And he put a guard on the door. And he chalked, apparently, in Cyrillic Russian. She said he chalked the words ammunition on the door, you know, so, and put guard there, as though it was an ammunition dump being guarded. And he kept them, she said, for about a couple of months, bringing food and that kind of thing. And then she said by that time things had sort of calmed down somewhat, enough to go out into the street in broad daylight and not expect to get shot and that sort of thing.